Jeffrey M. Carney, alias Kid, alias Jens Carney, a man of many disguises. No one suspected this fresh-faced young man was one of the most successful secret agents of the Cold War. An American who revealed NSA secrets to the East Germans. A traitor who ultimately was betrayed himself. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, he was kidnapped in broad daylight by U.S. special agents while walking the streets of Berlin.
Carney was the largest operation where it involved so many agents. We were making history.
Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin, one of the legendary battlefields of the Cold War. This border crossing in Berlin made headlines again and again whenever East and West clashed forces. At one point, American and Russian tanks faced off against one another here. It was often visited by presidents and heads of state. And it is the place where the life of Sergeant Jeffrey Carney changed dramatically. One night, shortly after Reagan visited Berlin in 1983, Carney decided to change sides and cross the line of demarcation here at Checkpoint Charlie.
The line on the ground was right about here. I knew that white line meant I was entering another world. I knew a little about the Democratic Republic of Germany, but not as much as I thought I did.
He had no idea what he was in for, or that he would pay for it someday.
You have to put the recruitment of Carney or Carney's cooperation with the East Germans near the top of the list of any successful operation during the Cold War. American intelligence never had an equivalent agent, somebody with that level of access to sensitive information from the other side.
When I've talked to him since he was released from prison, you don't feel like you're talking to someone who had a double life. I mean, you feel like the guy is straight. And, you know, we Americans are open, friendly people, right? And he comes across that way. If someone, you know, if you met him in a bar and you started talking to him, you probably would have never guessed that he was a spy and that he betrayed people and that he had this double life. Yeah, I think sometimes you can underestimate someone.
Daher der Deckname.
That's why my code name was Kid.
Kid. Jungscher, ein Bengel.
I was still quite young, and that was an advantage.
Das war vom Vorteil.
Even Comrade Stalin once said, the worst thing you can do is underestimate your enemy. And I was constantly underestimated by the enemy and by friends.
Carney was only 17 years old when he enlisted in the military. He came from a broken home and longed for a steady existence, without hunger and chaos. He joined the Air Force in late 1980, and shortly thereafter found himself in the Foreign Language Academy of the Department of Defense. He was supposed to learn German.
I speak German. I started learning German 6 months ago. My name is Captain Jim Orof, United States Army.
It's not as easy as this recruitment film makes it out to be, but after 6 months of intensive study, Jeffrey spoke German with virtually no accent. He was one of the top graduates in his class. In 1982, he was sent to the front lines of the Cold War, to Berlin. Having turned 18 in the meantime, he was housed in the Air Force complex at Tempelhof Airport in Berlin.
I lived here on the second floor, 3 windows on the right, just before the second staircase.
His place of work was farther away, in the southeastern part of town. A 30-minute drive. A shuttle bus ran between Tempelhof and the secret location in Marienfelde at the beginning and end of each shift. Carney was employed as a linguist with the 6912th Electronic Security Group. The isolated building was not to be overlooked, but no one knew what the antennas were for and what happened underneath the white domes. Even officials in the East had no idea. They had never been able to hire a spy. At this point, no one knew the NSA had offices here. Everyone thought it was just a radar station. In fact, the employees here were involved in infiltrating the air forces of the Warsaw Pact on the eastern side of the Iron Curtain. They eavesdropped round the clock in all kinds of languages: Russian, Polish, Czech. As a German expert, Carney was responsible for listening in on GDR pilots. He was quick to understand the secret world of the enemy, as well as the secrets of his own intercept station in Marienfelde. Everyone who worked here at Marienfelde wore the uniform of the U.S. Air Force, but their real employer was the National Security Agency, the NSA.
The NSA is
The NSA is the main protagonist of the story, because I not only worked for the Air Force, but also for the NSA. So my contract was with the NSA. Now that's a world of its own, a self-contained universe. Inside, we were used to it. We saw nothing, heard nothing, and said nothing. And we took that very seriously.
Berlin was on the front lines of the Cold War. The city was divided down the middle, and both sides were full of sites and secret operations. A sightseeing group in uniform. Jeffrey enjoyed learning about Berlin.
I was totally overwhelmed by the size of the city. For me, it was like a dream come true.
West Berlin was an eye-opener for the young man who had lived all his life in small-town America.
The metropolis of Berlin was the place for me. I immediately fell in love with it. Right away, I thought, this is where I want to live.
His first photo at the Berlin Wall. The divided city was exotic. It was at once fascinating and frightening. There were insights into East Berlin, and sometimes actual visits there. It was a chance to give the enemy a hard time.
You could even stand shoulder to shoulder with Russian and NVA soldiers, holding their solemn vigil. Yep, that's the enemy. What does his uniform smell like? That's how close we were.
Enemy contact in a snapshot. The GIs were free to move around Berlin as they liked, but there were special safety precautions when traveling to East Berlin. No contact with the Soviets.
And then they told us we couldn't use public transportation anymore because we might get kidnapped. That made it more exciting.
The barracks at Tempelhof soon sported undeniably evidence of his excursions into enemy territory. It was part of his job to get inside the enemy's head, to understand their mentality. These communist artifacts were not evidence of his personal leanings.
I wanted to understand the enemy. I put up pictures everywhere, centerfolds from Armeerumschau, the magazine of the East German Army. It was total immersion, slipping into the skin of the enemy.
A Honecker poster made its rounds in the U.S. barracks. At this point, Carney was still an enthusiastic American. The state visit to Berlin by President Ronald Reagan was one of the highlights of the 18-year-old Air Force man's life.
That was such a patriotic day, such a patriotic feeling, when the president of the most powerful nation on earth landed at my airport in Berlin, where I was so proud to serve. Yes, I got to call home and tell my mother I saw the president today. There he was, my hero, our president, and I thought, I'm actually his representative here on the front lines of the Cold War. I was so proud. It was a wonderful day.
Carney stood right in front of the president. He could have shaken his hand. At least he got 2 snapshots from up close. Sergeant Carney took pleasure in completing his wiretapping tasks and was one of the best at his job. It was fun for him. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. But before long, he began feeling bored. His work wasn't challenging anymore. He began having difficulties with his superiors.
I think Jeffrey felt that he was not appreciated enough for the work that he did and the intelligence that he had, that he didn't feel that the people that he worked for in that organization that he worked for didn't truly appreciate him for the ability that he had. And oftentimes, that's how espionage begins. Someone doesn't feel appreciated.
That's what I looked like back then, long time ago.
Then the young man's life went totally out of whack. He found himself attracted to other men. That was a difficult problem for a member of the Air Force. He knew he could be fired for being gay. If he wanted to keep his job, he would have to learn to hide his sexual orientation, at least within the Air Force.
I saw it firsthand. Many of us were thrown out. As soon as it became known, the OSI knocked at your door. And then your career was over, and for me that meant my entire future. The Air Force was what had saved me after a home life that can only be described as a catastrophe. The Air Force was my salvation, my everything. It meant I had an ordinary, orderly life. And what if I were to lose my entire future because of my sexuality? I really felt trapped.
In his free time, the off-duty airman began spending more and more time in the gay bars of West Berlin. His situation seemed increasingly hopeless.
I thought it was just a matter of time before it was all over. It literally drove me to the edge of a nervous breakdown. I thought, I have to get out of here.
On April 22, 1983, he once again found himself in a pub, drinking out of desperation. His thoughts were in turmoil. That's when he made a fateful decision that would turn his entire world upside down. It was nearly midnight when he arrived at Checkpoint Charlie, very drunk. He seemed prepared to leave everything behind him, to put an end to his previous life as he had known it. He was ready to flee to a country that his president had said was part of the axis of evil. He staggered toward the east, the GDR border guards listened incredulously as he told them he wanted to defect to East Germany. The Secret Service agents who arrived at the scene 20 minutes later were less interested in his deluded demands for asylum. They had other questions.
And where do you work, Tempelhof? No, not at Tempelhof. Then where? Marienfelde. Their eyes got big. They were very interested in that. Then it was a whole different conversation. And does this mean you're ready to talk, to spill everything you know? I thought it was like the invitation to the dance.
2 hours later, Carney found himself in a secret safe house where he was subjected to a thorough interrogation.
To have a source who works in an institution like the NSA, that's worth its weight in gold. Of course, it was a godsend for them, and they would have liked to have had more like that. And there were others, but just not very many. So, of course, they had no choice but to jump at the chance.
The HVA was very good at recognizing people's weaknesses, so they could see right away that he had psychological problems, and they used them to their own end. So, you know, they could have someone who was supportive of him. He would say there, oh, you know, you're right, they're really horrible back at work, you know, we'll help you out. And they really portrayed themselves as friends who could help him, and he needed that support.
It was like a game of chess. They also planned and executed their moves very carefully. And I was totally, well, I had no more pawns on the board. They'd all been wiped out. I had no chance at all. I didn't even know what game we were playing. And that was the problem. I didn't know the rules. And that was to their advantage. They knew I was a fish out of water, and they could do whatever they wanted with me.
The East German secret agents took their time. They pulled out all the stops and made it unmistakably clear to him that he had to go back.
And then within 6 hours, they, let's say, gently pressured me, persuaded me to return to my countrymen and work for peace from there.
After 12 hours of interrogation, the young sergeant had sobered up and was driven back to the train station at Friedrichstrasse, where his future handler guided him through the passport formalities and put him on a train back to Tempelhof.
That was really the worst part of the whole thing for me, that I had to go back. I was terrified, and I would never have been able to turn myself in and say, I've made a huge mistake. I spent the day in East Germany yesterday. They would have locked me up immediately, or they would have sent me back as a double agent, and that's even worse. I thought, I don't want to get involved in that world, but I already had one foot inside.
The day after his fateful excursion to East Germany, Carney showed up for work again as though nothing had happened. His handlers would be happy with what he provided them. After all, the brand new spy was the first ever to supply exclusive insights into the world of the National Security Agency.
The East Bloc didn't know a lot about the NSA because it was truly secret, like a secret service should be. The National Security Agency was called no such agency because a lot of people hadn't heard of it. Of course, now everyone's heard of the National Security Agency with Edward Snowden's revelations. Back then, it was a very secretive organization. First of all, Jeffrey Carney illuminated the secretive National Security Agency for the East Bloc, for the Ministry for State Security.
Klaus Eichner was a colonel with the Ministry for State Security and was charged with evaluating the material Carney supplied. Particularly spectacular were the details about a secret U.S. program that aimed to manipulate the radio communications of the East Bloc's pilots.
The basic idea was to be able to insert yourself into the pilot communication and convey falsified orders.
Carney's office had acquired, they were recording the voice of ground controllers in Russian ground controllers at an Air Force base in East Germany. And they were working on a technology to copy those voices using voice print technology. And in the event of war, we would substitute false commands for the real commands. And the Russian planes, they would bomb their own troops and shoot at their own forces.
The Carney information made its way to the desk of East Germany's top spy, Marcus Wolf.
And Wolf said, when he read this, he couldn't believe it. It shocked him. He said it was like science fiction until he turned it over to his technical experts who told him that it was at least technically feasible to do this.
It was the hottest phase of the Cold War. SS-20 rockets were being deployed in the east and Pershing IIs in the west. 1983, NATO initiated its Able Archer maneuver. In Marienfelde, Carney was involved.
83, Cold War, Able Archer. What does that mean? That means in a few hours, We were about to give the Russians such a scare. They would believe this was the real thing.
Dass sie glauben, jetzt kommt es wirklich.
NATO practiced using nuclear weapons and sent out a DEFCON 1 alarm, the highest level alarm they had. And that set off the alarm bells on the other side of the Iron Curtain.
Und es ging darum natürlich, dass im Ernstfall
Of course, it was all about finding out what communication channels would be used in case of a real attack.
Kommunikationswege benutzt werden. Das
In layman's
bedeutet für die
terms,
Laien,
that means we wanted to
hatten einen
provoke the
Windtag
Russians
vorgehabt, die
to
Russen
such an
so
extent
zu provozieren, dass
they
sie
really
wirklich
believed it
glauben,
was an actual attack.
es ist der Ernstfall.
Talk about playing with fire. The Soviets feared a real attack and moved to their highest level of readiness. Carney was afraid the situation might get out of control, and after getting off work, he paid a visit to his courier in West Berlin, the one who was to be contacted only in case of an absolute emergency.
Wie schnell kannst du dann
How fast can you get over
rübergehen?
there?
Brauchst du nur
Well, in about an hour, I reckon. Well, then you have to go right now. This is really an emergency. He said, okay, I'll go right now to East Berlin.
Ja, nach
At
Ostberlin.
that moment, I was really willing to spy for the Ministry for State Security. I thought, okay, my motives were not entirely clean at first, but now I don't need a reason anymore. Something along those lines. The FO no longer has to convince me. All the motivation I needed was in the documents right in front of me in Marienfelde.
Jetzt in diesen Dokumenten vor mir in Marienfelde.
Carney, whose code name was Kid, collected everything he could get his hands on. He was a resourceful mule with a good nose for security gaps.
Das ist alles total verwachsen,
It's all totally grown over. Can't recognize the thing.
nicht mehr zu erkennen. Wir sind etwa
It was somewhere around here.
Das war hier.
This was the nerve center, as it were, the communication center.
Kommunikationsgebiet, Verbrennungsräume waren hier.
Incineration rooms were back here. That's where we destroyed everything that was put down on
wurde
paper.
hier vernichtet.
The perfect place for a spy to go to work.
Man ist stundenlang
You're
alleine
often
gelassen
alone
in
for
dem
hours
Raum.
in that place.
Keiner will dahin.
Nobody
Das
wants
ist
to
ein
be there.
Verbrennungsraum.
It's an
Das ist
incineration
die Hölle.
room. It's like hell in there.
Das war
It was also a
wie eine
treasure trove.
Schatztruhe.
The Air Force, but you know, some of his older colleagues kind of think maybe he wasn't that good or something. So, I mean, with the Stasi, he was doing a good job for them, and he got approval. He got stroked, as we say in English. So, I think that helped a lot. That for what he would steal, that he would probably bring the documents, and he would get a lot of praise that he was doing a good job and things like that.
The handlers in East Berlin were very satisfied. They even got their hands on original documents, especially risky goods.
We always just shook our heads. How does he get hold of this stuff? We asked about it. Don't you worry about that. That's not your problem, as long as we're delivering.
Kidd delivered a lot of material. Every 6 weeks, he was secretly heaved over the wall in a forest, a very risky act. Sometimes he stayed for several days. Then he went back over the wall to his so-called area of operations.
Angst darf hier keiner haben.
You can't have any fear here. It's just not allowed.
Das ist schwach.
It's weak, and weak people go
Schwache Leute gehen
down.
unter. Ja.
That's what the
Das haben
handlers
sie auch
assured us
bei
again and
uns
again.
befestigt, glaube ich, die Führungsoffiziere. Die haben gesagt, naja, wir
We don't make that
machen
kind of
solche
mistake.
Fehler nicht.
We repeat
Wir
everything until we're
wiederholen
sure
alles
you understand
zigmal.
it.
Wir
We
sind
know
sicher, dass
that in
wir
an
so
extreme
viel
case,
wir wissen,
you will know how
dass
to
auch in
behave.
extremen
That's what you
Fall
practice
weißt, wie du
and practice
dich zu
and
benehmen
practice.
hast. Das ist geübt und geübt und geübt. Also das heißt
I mean,
Angst,
fear, anger, and impatience,
Ärger,
everything. We had to learn to turn it all off.
alles.
Gone.
Wir müssen lernen, alles abzustellen.
No longer exists.
Es
At that
existiert,
moment,
wir
you are a
sind
cold,
eine
unfeeling
kalte,
person.
nicht fühlende Person in dem Moment.
But in September of 1985, the up-and-coming star of the East German spy business did learn what fear feels like. By that time, he had been transferred to an air base in Texas. His job there was to teach German. As a language instructor, he still had access to secret material, and he was still delivering the goods to East Germany. But then he was scheduled for a lie detector test and was afraid to blow his cover.
Most Americans fear the polygraph and that it is a good deterrent to espionage. I know a lot of people, they would think about the polygraph in their day-to-day work. It was always there. It was omnipresent in their heads.
Even the thought of a device was enough for me to break out in sweat. I was very scared. I thought, now it's just a matter of time. What will you do, Jens, when they come? You have to take a seat here on the plastic chair. That machine knows only 3 outcomes. It's either good, bad, or uncertain. And uncertain is just as bad as bad. So, you've only got a 33% chance, if you're really good at it.
Did you buy that watch from an unknown person in Dugan's bar?
Yes.
I can't allow it to happen. I said to myself, I have to get out of this trap, out of this potential trap somehow. I didn't want to go to jail.
On September 3rd, 1985, Carney ran away, heading for Mexico City to hide out there. 24 hours after he disappeared, U.S. investigators began searching for the runaway employee, who was entrusted with confidential information. They found out that he had booked a flight to Mexico and even determined what hotel he was staying in. A few days after he arrived there, a major earthquake devastated the city, and the Americans lost track of his whereabouts. The investigators even suspected Carney might be among the 10,000 casualties.
As
fate would have it, the hotel was flattened, nothing but rubble. So they thought, the guy is gone. They told my mother, your son is dead.
No one knew that the missing person had long since gone underground at the embassy of the German Democratic Republic. And no one knew that the missing person, the deserter, was in fact an East German spy. His handlers in faraway East Berlin were not exactly thrilled that their top spy had simply thrown in the towel. Still, they decided to bring him to East Germany.
But that was not an easy thing to do, to smuggle an American out of Mexico and into Cuba. So they spoke with Fidel Castro about it, and Fidel Castro said, let's do it. Let's help the GDR. At any rate, the Cubans took custody of Kidd in Mexico and put him on a plane to Havana.
Then the handler came to me and said, Jens, I don't know if we will do that, but it's possible that we will take your passport away from you. Then we'll send it through diplomatic channels back to Mexico and throw it in the ruins. Then either your countrymen or the Mexicans will find it, and then you're officially dead.
In October 1985, Carney was back in Berlin. In East Berlin, the Ministry for State Security showed its appreciation. The AWOL sergeant was given a completely furnished brand new apartment. But the kid didn't like his place in the prefabricated high-rise in Marzahn. In fact, he was unhappy with the entire situation.
At that very moment, I realized the apartment was bugged, and they were sending me people who were supposed to share my bed with me. They actually did that. That was so unbelievable for me, after everything I had done for the German Democratic Republic.
Finally, in May of 1986, he was given a different apartment in the center of Berlin, in a prestigious, older building with a telephone. And there was a brand new red Lada, too, a luxury car in the workers' and farmers' communist paradise.
and a driver's license to boot, without even the examination. A brand new permit. Everything was wonderful.
And to top it all off, he even found a boyfriend. Love at first sight.
We met in a beer pub called the Burgfrieden, a totally run-of-the-mill gay bar. We met on Thursday and I moved in with him on Saturday. It was wonderful and everything was perfect until the Berlin Wall came down.
When Wolfgang met the love of his life, he was going by the name of Jens Carney. He didn't learn the whole story for quite some time. The U.S. citizen named Jeffrey Carney, with a C, had long since become the GDR citizen Jens Carney, with a K, a new identity.
I looked at the picture and the name, the birth date. I said, now it's official. Now you really are a citizen of the German Democratic Republic.
He was officially a citizen of the GDR, with an apartment, an address, and identity card issued by the German Democratic Republic. That's completely normal. All the secret agencies do that. They have to, at least if they want to protect their agents. There's no other way.
Major Günther Enterlein was charged with taking care of the kid, rather like a babysitter.
And my job was, for example, to make sure he was happy, because he was, after all, still a foreigner, an American, and you have to make certain accommodations.
The ministry even created an entirely new job for the kid in the Humboldt building just opposite Friedrichstadtpalast Theater. His task there was to spy on his countrymen at the U.S. Embassy with the help of special antennas. No one there suspected that a former NSA eavesdropping specialist was now spending 8 hours a day listening in on their own radio communication on behalf of the GDR.
And the information kept flowing more and more in those days. It was 88, 89. I kept myself busy with the embassy, and they were, of course, very involved with the resistance inside the GDR. So the end was in sight for me. I knew it, but I kept working, like the palace guard. As long as the king is still on the throne, we'll keep up appearances.
The Berlin Wall came down in November, marking the end of Kid's spy career. His employer was now on his deathbed. The Humboldt building was closed down in mid-December of 1989. The equipment and files were disposed of. The files about the kid were supposed to be destroyed as well.
And I asked several times, is it really all gone? Yes, it's really gone. That means there are no clues, no evidence about your real identity, where you were living, where you came from. Your former code name, Kid, in the GDR.
Now, Jens Carney had to look for a new job and decided to go underground. In January of 1990, he applied for a job with the Berlin Transport Company and literally went underground, piloting a subway train between Pankow and Potsdamer Platz. What the ex-kid didn't know was that disposing of all the files had been too big a job for the Ministry for State Security. The incineration room was out of order. The document shredders were out of commission. Some of the secret files even ended up in personal homes. Carney felt safe and secure and was quick to adapt to his new quality of life. He enjoyed his newfound freedom. All of Berlin was open now, and it was turning into a party town.
That's what it's like to live when you don't have to deal with the damn spy agencies. That's what it's like to live a normal life. Now you can really live, just live, without any handlers.
Some former employees of the Ministry for State Security quickly recognized the value of the secret files and began offering them for sale. One of them was Captain Hans Joachim Lehmann from Department 3, the department where the kid had most recently been employed. He knew the kid had defected from the USA and that he was still living in Berlin under an assumed name. That's how the CIA tracked down the missing person. By the end of October 1990, the Americans knew his real identity. They knew that the Sergeant Jeffrey Carney, who went AWOL in 1985, was now living in East Berlin under the name Jens Carney. They knew where he lived and where he worked. In December 1990, an OSI unit was charged with a secret mission to arrest the former Air Force man.
OSI is the service's premier investigative and law enforcement agency. OSI agents provide...
The recruiting film shows that the OSI is a special unit operating worldwide and ready for anything. These specialists know all the tricks and techniques needed to hunt down criminals and traitors.
OSI, are you ready?
In early 1991, a task force was put together in Berlin to solve the Carney case once and for all. Special Agent Thomas McBroom was a member of the team that was charged with apprehending the missing person.
For us there in the office, probably 12, 15 people that were involved. Our entire office basically closed down to work on the last few days of this Carney investigation and do logistics and so forth. We had some clinical psychologists that were assigned to us start getting into the mix and kind of doing an analysis of Jeffrey. We were able to kind of get an idea that Jeffrey was a passive, not an aggressive type of person, and just very intelligent and meticulous in everything that he did.
This was a vendetta. They had to settle score with this guy. But that's an important thing to know. What did he actually reveal? This is very important information from a counterintelligence point of view. That in itself would probably be enough of a justification to nab him and bring him back to the United States.
Since February, U.S. attorneys have been working feverishly to prepare the legal proceedings for this extremely complicated case. The wanted person had a German passport and was living in a sovereign country. The Americans had no jurisdiction to act on their own.
We had the people that needed to give us the approval, gave us the approval, and we operated knowing that this was a decision that had been made, and it was made in the best interest of, the U.S. government.
In April of 1991, Carney went on vacation for a few weeks together with his partner. For 2 weeks, no one was in their apartment on Pinchstrasse, and for that reason, no one noticed the secret activities being carried out by the OSI. The U.S. investigators had already set up operations in front of building number 12, and now they were observing the apartment round the clock. On April 20th, the couple returned to Berlin from their vacation.
I was so exhausted from driving, I thought I would go straight to bed. And I was out of commission for nearly 30 hours, not moving a muscle, with the curtains closed.
Mid-morning was when we had spotted his car in front of his apartment, and everyone was alerted. We met at the office, packed our stuff in the van, and then we went down to Jeffrey's apartment, and we set up.
The entire OSI task force was ordered to Pinchstrasse and waited there for the final orders. But they still weren't entirely sure Carney was actually in the apartment.
And on the evening, if I recall, Jeffrey came out on the balcony, and we took a picture of him, and then we're able to show that we do have a live sighting.
It almost looked like Carney had spotted his hunters. He looked right into the camera. They had to be prepared for anything, And they were.
And 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, extremely quiet in former East Berlin. And we had a couple of agents, as they approached Jeffrey's car, squirted super glue into the door lock so that he couldn't get the door unlocked.
I got up early and opened the curtains. It was actually a very nice day for April.
April 22nd, 1991. Carney left the house shortly after 9 a.m. He was planning to sell his red Lada and buy his first Western car. The moment he left the building, one of the most spectacular operations in the history of the OSI got underway. 8 armed special agents went into position. 4 began shadowing the target person.
Then I immediately noticed something was wrong here. All the alarm lights were flashing in my brain. 2 of these guys suddenly appeared at the same time, went to the other side of the street, and suddenly there were 2 more behind me.
All I did was, I was watching the back of his head, and I essentially saw nothing around him. I was just focused on, watch that head, don't lose that head. And we all had an adrenaline rush.
9:40 a.m. It all happens very quickly. 4 armed special agents rush him. Thomas McBroom is the first to make contact, putting his hand on the shoulder of the target person.
And then this young man says, "Are you Sergeant Jeffrey Carney?" "Wie bitte? Are you Sergeant Jeffrey M. Carney?" He repeated his question. And then I said in English, "Yes, I am."
And he acknowledged that's who he was. And in essence, that's what we needed. So we knew we had the right guy. There was never any doubt that this was him.
It was over. Over and done.
Kidnapping on an open street in broad daylight in the middle of Berlin. The hunt was over. There was no escaping.
At that moment, I was capable of anything. I would have shot them.
And if Jeffrey had drawn a gun, we would have shot him.
But everything went according to plan. Jeff didn't put up a fight, just like the psychologists had predicted.
We were concerned because the Polizei was not aware, so we were concerned with getting him off the street quickly. Jeffrey was a German citizen, and essentially it could have been a political explosion. Could have been, you know, a multitude of things that happened. Americans kidnap a German citizen, you know, so there was a lot of things that politically outside of my realm that could have gone wrong.
But the operation wasn't over yet. They needed to bring Carney to Tempelhof as quickly as possible.
Then I asked him, "Where are you taking me?" And he just kept saying, "Shut up, just shut up." And then I started telling him that what they were doing was illegal. I asked him where were the German police, and asked whether they had been informed. And I could see in their eyes, the moment I said the word police, they were scared.
Meanwhile, 3 other special agents entered the apartment to look for evidence.
They burst in and pushed me up against the wall and said, "First of all, just calm down, keep quiet and stuff. We just arrested Mr. Carney. He's not the guy you think you know." And they said, "Keep calm. We don't want to have to get rough."
On the way to Tempelhof Airport, past Checkpoint Charlie, the fateful place where it all started, nearly 7 years ago to the day when he defected to the East. And now he is handcuffed. And his biggest hope is that his friend Wolfgang will sound the alarm.
If the Germans find out, and Wolfgang is not stupid, he'll go to the police and say, "My partner has been kidnapped." That's not something that happens every day. Then all hell will break loose, and they'll come and rescue me. That was my hope.
At first, it was just shock. Then, later, it was mostly fear. I mean, I thought they would come and get me too, because I already knew too much, or had found out about it. And I didn't do a thing. Then I felt so terrible, I basically just closed all the curtains and isolated myself. For 10 days, I couldn't eat or drink or do anything else. I was devastated, mentally and physically.
It was clearly illegal. You know, there's no way to skirt that issue. They kidnapped a German citizen off the streets of Germany. The German government more or less looked the other way.
Carney is back where his Air Force career began, in Berlin. He knows these rooms, knows where he will be interrogated sooner or later. The interrogators know they have to get all the information out of him while he is still in shock and doesn't have a clear idea of his options. Basically, Carney is taken by surprise. There's an airplane on the runway, ready to take off. The moment he refuses to cooperate, they intend to fly him out. At first, the kid seems cooperative, although his request to talk to a lawyer is repeatedly denied.
And then, the big surprise. 2 big red notebooks, which I recognized immediately. The original notebooks from Marienfelde, which I must have handed over to the handlers in 83, 84. That was a blow. Original material. They had it. At that moment, I realized either they had access to the archives and the safes, or, and this was more likely, somebody, and I think, for heaven's sake, that somebody betrayed me. Then I started sweating. And then I said to myself, for the last time, shut up. Until I've spoken with a lawyer, I won't say another word.
30 minutes later, Carney was on the airplane. "18 hours later, he landed in Washington, and shortly thereafter, in jail. The betrayed traitor, caught in a trap, fallen out of time. The Cold War is over."
If they had caught him during the Cold War, they could have turned him and used him as a double agent. That's one scenario, but they would have had no use for him. I mean, he was burned. The GDR was dead. It was over. The game was over.
That place was like hell, like Dante's hell. I was terrified. When you're a non-person, anything can happen to you. For example, you can just disappear. Whatever happened to him? To whom? I have no idea who you're talking about. It was really terrible. They made it clear to me that they were very serious. Write something down. Write something down. Let's see what will happen. I was scared.
A hopeless situation. As he saw it, there was only one thing he could do to make his future a little more bearable. He would have to make a deal. By cooperating completely and admitting to everything, he hoped to at least reduce his sentence.
So, I had to tell everything, willingly and with no reservations. I had to talk to every secret agency and anyone who wanted to know anything, just to keep them happy. And there was a long list. The FBI, CIA, NSA, the State Department.
Carney agreed to negotiate and told them everything he knew. He was interrogated for months.
If the Ministry for State Security had still existed, I could have waited for help to arrive. I would have said nothing.
Ultimately, Carney was sentenced to 38 years in prison. for espionage and dereliction of duty. His process was tried in secret, and the general public never heard about it, either in the U.S. nor anywhere else. His case wasn't made public until many years later. In the meantime, his case has nearly been forgotten. That goes for the spying as well as the kidnapping. The NSA espionage station was dismantled, and the equipment completely disassembled about the same time Carney's court process was going on. In 2003, Carney was released from prison after serving 12 years. The deal was done. But his application for German citizenship was turned down.
They stole my identity from me. I'm no longer allowed to be the person I want to be. Who exactly is Jens?
Jeffrey Carney now officially goes by the name of Jens Carney again. He lives in a small town in Ohio, where he struggles to make ends meet with his dog and a new boyfriend.